the law forbidding creditors from collecting on prescribed debts, which falls under the National Credit Act 34 of 2005, is pretty well known. So the aim of this law is to safeguard consumers against unfair and exploitative practices by creditors and has been in effect for a number of years. Despite the legal requirements and the guaranteed protection they offer consumers, Reana Steyn, the Ombudsman for Banking Services, warned that the OBS is still receiving investigation and resolving complaints from bank customers relating to prescribed debts. In some cases, banks have been found guilty of engaging in this illegal practice. It may sound a little bit complicated, but the Ombudsman for Banking Services, Reana Steyn, is here. She's with us to simplify all of it and to give us some good definitions and explanations as to what we're speaking about. Reana, great to have you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Good morning. Thanks, Leanne. I think that's easier said than done.
No, I think
I'll
you
try
can
and
do
simplify
it.
it.
I'm going to ask you very, very simply, just I suppose right at the top, what is prescribed debt? That's probably the best starting point.
I think let's equate the word prescribed to extinguished. So there's certain debts after a certain period of time that it's extinguished or lapsed. So you had a debt, and in this case, we're talking about debts under the National Credit Act. But, for the average person, it is a normal credit agreement, your credit card, your personal loan. Any credit agreement you entered into will probably fall under the National Credit Act as an individual. And after a period of 3 years, subject to certain conditions, that debt will lapse. In other words, it's no longer recoverable. For example, if you haven't made no payment, if you never acknowledge the debt in that period, and that is very important because if you receive a phone call from the creditor, which is very common, and they ask you, you owe this money, are you going to pay? And you say, yes, I will pay next month, next week. That's an acknowledgement. That interrupts the prescription. So acknowledgement, no payment, no acknowledgement, and no summons and judgment. So if those three factors, in basic principles are there, so debt last paid 6 years ago, nothing happened for 6 years, that debt has prescribed, lapsed, it's extinguished by law. So I think that is the basics. But then, of course, the 3-year period is only applicable to some or most of the debts. You do have judgments, that's 30 years. So they don't lapse after 3 years if you don't pay your judgment.
Wow.
And also debt secured by a mortgage bond, also not 3 years, that's 30 years. But, I think for the average loan, your finance agreement under the National Credit Act, think about the 3-year period. And certainly if you're unsure, you can ask.
Okay, so let's...
is this a debt that has got a 3-year prescription period under the National Credit Act?
Yeah.
And somebody like our office will be able to answer you.
What falls under a 30-year agreement? I mean, that's sort of something that we need to understand.
Sorry, I missed that.
The 30-year
missing
agreement.
there for a second.
What are examples of what would fall under that 30-year agreement?
So I think the two main ones that's commonly known is the judgments and a mortgage bond. So those are the 30-year ones.
So you've got to be very, very aware what you're signing, and you've got to understand exactly what it is that you're getting into. Because, let's just say, the chances of it happening, how often does that happen? I mean, if you, for instance, take out a car loan, or you take out a home loan, or you take out whatever the case may be, and for 3 years you've done nothing, nobody's contacted you, you haven't acknowledged that you owe this money, and then suddenly 3 years and 1 day afterwards, they contact you and say, hang on a second, you owe us money. Are you in your legal rights to say, sorry, it's over, that prescribed debt is gone?
Yeah, and I think that is really what we're trying to achieve with, sort of this latest press release. Not everybody knows about their rights, and we're not advocating for 1 minute that people should stop paying their debts. That's not how this country is going to work. So if you've got a debt that you legally owe, you should pay it. But if you had a debt and it's maybe 6 years ago, 11 years ago, we've seen cases, and nobody's contacted you, you never paid, you maybe, sort of legitimately forgot about it. And now a debt collector is calling you, and you know about prescription, then you really should claim this debt has prescribed. And if they say, and in the case of a bank, if they say, no, it's not prescribed, for whatever reason, and you're unsure about this, that is why you can come to our office. We've seen so many of these complaints. So you would think that, it's no longer happening. Nobody's collecting on prescribed debt. But they are, because we've seen hundreds of cases. And we have had to ask the banks to repay hundreds of thousands, I think in excess of 1 million. So, and I think that's just the warning. We're not saying don't pay your debt. Please do pay your debt, because there are other bad consequences of not paying your debt. And you can get a summons and a judgment against you. But if that nothing happened for many years, there's a good chance that it has prescribed. And then you need to at least understand your rights.
So let me ask you this question, and it's a kind of in a very simple way as well. I open up an account at, say, Edgar's. Then I pull up I get a whole bunch of I owe them a lot of money. Then I change my cell phone number, I move my home, and I don't alert them of all of these kind of things. And I disappear off the radar. And then for 3 years, they can't contact me, they can't find me. And then all of a sudden, a few years later, that lapses after that time, they do find me, and they know, hang on a second, there's that person that owes us money. Am I still liable to pay that?
Yes, I know. I mean, so the data is prescribed. So the mere fact that they can't get hold of you, I think the law obviously took that into account, which is why they gave them 3 years. So, I think if a credit provider, wants to collect their debt, they've got 3 years to appoint a tracer to do whatever it is they can do to find you. And those are the 3 years that they've got to issue summons. So, 3 years is not nothing. I mean, that's a long period to look for you. So if they can't find you in 3 years, because I think in many cases they don't look for you for 3 years, then they can't after 6 years say, well, oh, here you are, you opened a new account, so we found you now. But for many years we did absolutely nothing. And I think that is sort of the balance that the law tried to strike, because it gave the credit provider 3 years to find you.
Okay.
So and if they can't find you, even though you're hiding, which I'm sure that there are debtors who do that, that debts will still prescribe.
So now let's talk about that, because that's where we're seeing that some of these institutions, or whatever it may be, they're actually going into your bank account and taking that debt that they say they owe you. Is that what's happening? Just enlighten us now as to, so we understand what prescribed debt is. After 3 years it lapses. You've got to read the small print, because there are issues that sometimes it does go up to 30 years. But once that prescribed debt has gone, it's over, and now you've got these guys coming in and demanding that money. Talk to us about what's happening. How are they getting access to this money?
Okay, so, of course, a stranger can't just get access to your bank account. The only people who can get access to your bank account is your own bank. And that is if you've entered into agreement with them, that you've specifically signed that if you owe them money, say on the credit card, and you've got a current account and there's money in the current account, that they can deduct that money that you owe on the credit card. But you had to agree to that. So it's not something that's just going to happen. Maybe you don't realize that, maybe you're not aware of it, but it's not something they can just do willy-nilly. It's not like they have just rights over your money in the bank account. And if you feel like that, I mean, we've seen those complaints as well, and we investigate. Did this consumer agree specifically that in this account that you can actually do settle? So a stranger, a third party, the clothing retailer, they don't have access to your money in your bank account. So they can't come and just get it. The only people who can do that is if you owe the bank money and you've got money in that same bank. And then also under very specific circumstances. They can't just go in and look for your money and take it. So there are also, issues around their law, and also the letter of the agreement. So we investigate that in certain cases. In other cases, consumers, sort of accept that, yes, they owe the money, they've got money, and the bank can then set it off. So then at least they owe nothing. Yeah. They won't be getting summonses and judgments. So that's what happens there, sort of also very simplistically.
Way of looking at it. I mean, I can imagine that many people don't know that they have these rights. I honestly do believe that there are many South Africans who are in the dark about this when it comes to prescribed debt. So whose responsibility is it to look out for them?
Um, that's a difficult question. So, even as an ombuds office, there are people who argue that it's not the role of an ombud to educate consumers about their rights. We should just play the role of the independent, impartial adjudicator when we receive complaints. But we feel that, there really is a role for us to try and educate consumers about their rights in certain cases that fall under our jurisdiction. The National Credit Regulator, I do know that they have, for the past, say, 10, 12, 15 years, spent a lot of money on, going out to communities and doing a lot to try and educate consumers. So I'm sure there are more. If you think back 15 years ago when the National Credit Act started, definitely more awareness about credit in general and about agreements, but that doesn't mean that everybody knows. So I think under the new laws, the new regulator on the block, the FSCA, I think they are going to sort of do sort of more of a focused, thing about consumer education in financial services in general, and try and sort of pull it all together, because so many companies, if you think about our, big insurance companies, the banks themselves, people try and do consumer education, but it's all scattered. And I think that is something that we need to fix. Many people have said we need to start at school level. I agree with that. You need to start teaching kids already about all sorts of concepts, whether it's bureau listings or understanding credit, how interest works. Because once they leave school, they've got accounts. They're students. They spend money. They need to understand these things. So I hope that in the future there's more of a a focused effort. But we're trying to do this. And just as a matter of interest, some people, last time when I issued a press release, you see these comments on social media that say, we know about all this, what is the Ombudsman trying to do? But there are always people that hear this message from you and from me the first time.
Absolutely.
That's why we keep on doing it.
And that's what we're here for, to give that kind of sort of education. So perhaps you can give us a successful scenario where these matters have actually been resolved. What case studies are you able to mention that have actually been dealt with successfully?
Yeah, we've had a number of very good success stories. I suppose it also depends on from which lens you look at this. But just last week, I saw a case study come through where one of our adjudicators were looking at a case where this person, we looked at it, we saw it was prescribed. And many of these cases, and I should mention, people don't even come to us because they think it's prescribed. Sometimes they come to us for a different reason. They think the interest is too much. Or maybe they query the outstanding balance. They don't understand how this thing is so high. It started as, like 10,000 and now it's 50, and they query that. And then when we look at it, we see that, but their debt is prescribed because nobody's made a payment or there's nothing happening for, say, 6 years. So we've had a few of those. So people don't always even ask to investigate prescription. And last week we had one where we had to recommend to the bank that they write off 200,000 rand because this debt has long prescribed. And even a payment that the person made after the debt prescribed to a debt collector that started contacting her, it was only 3,000 rand that we asked that they even refund that amount. And they agreed. So we've seen many of these. We've had almost 200 cases in the last 18 months. And more than a third of those we've had to recommend to the bank that they refund or that they write off the debt. And that's why I say over 1 million had to be written off.
So let me ask you this one. What about traffic fines? What about the e-tolls? That's a good one.
SARS, traffic fines, even your TV licenses, we've had those. So no, those are not civil debts.
Okay.
Okay, so those are legislated, debts. So it's not going to fall under the National Credit Act specifically. So definitely not what I'm talking about here. So the typical, sort of Prescription Act rules do not apply because, as I say, those are not civil debts. They, so tax. We've had the thing about tax. TV licenses in the old days, people were often complaining about that, and traffic fines, not the same as a civil debt.
You talk about a TV license as if it doesn't exist anymore. It does. It's
Yes.
still there, I promise
Yeah.
you. Listen, Reana, talk to us about contact details and places that people can actually get hold of you and if they want some assistance, because I'm sure this has opened up a couple of questions in people's minds. How do they get hold of you?
Yeah, so please Google us. I mean, the Banking Ombudsman is on the website. We've got a very good website, and you can put in your complaint on the website. So very easy, and just click submit and write the story there. So www.obssa, it's for Ombudsman for Banking Services South Africa, OBSSA. Also, we've got a call center, 0860 800 900. We've got an info inbox, info@obssa.co.za. So yeah, try and get hold of us. Our services are free of charge. And I've got a team of lawyers looking at these things for you. So we can certainly try and investigate. And not everybody likes the outcome of our answers, but it's certainly free to ask, and we can investigate. We can get all the documents, all the information from the bank, and at least assist you in that way.
Reana, thank you very much for talking to us. That, of course, was Reana Steyn. She's the Ombudsman for Banking Services, talking to us about something called prescribed debt and your right to that. In a nutshell, anything over 3 years and you are having that debt outstanding, hasn't been collected by somebody, they have no right to start banging your door down for their money, because that is a prescribed or an expired debt already. So have a look at the fine print, however, to make sure that you're well within your rights.